This conversation features Vanina Sucharitkul, partner at Rajah Tann, and Mariel Dimsey, independent arbitrator, as they discuss navigating cultural differences, building a global presence, and the evolving role of women in the field. They also reflect on the importance of personal branding, the value of mentorship, and the shifting landscape of international arbitration. Let's get started.
Hi, Mariel. Our theme today is internationality, how moving across borders and systems has shaped our careers, challenges, and perspective in international arbitration.
Hi, Vanina. I'm happy to be doing this podcast with you. As you said, the theme is internationality, and we thought we'd start with how we first met each other. Do you remember how we met in person?
Of course. It was the fall of 2012 in Paris. I had just recently been appointed as an ICC court member, and I was one of the youngest, so I attended every court session as an observer. And we were excused from a case, and we were standing in the corridor, and you said to me, are you related to Sompong by any chance?
Yes, I did. So it was a flashback for me, because we'd had this case where your grandfather was our Thai law expert, and he had mentioned his granddaughter on many occasions, including in a hearing in Hong Kong where you were apparently travelling with him. So when we were both ousted out of the room in that ICC court session, I put two and two together and guessed that that was the reason. So that was how we first met, yeah.
And then I thought, what a small world, because I remembered all the binders that it must have been you who mailed to him in our apartment, in our house in San Francisco that had the name of your law firm on it. And to think that we could have met back in 2008 at that hearing in Hong Kong, because I was essentially his luggage handler, and I would follow him around the world to help carry his luggage.
And look how far you've come since then.
And then we met again in Hong Kong, or our paths crossed again in Hong Kong, because we moved there around the same time.
That's right, yeah. So I don't think I saw you much between 2012 and 2016. And then I got to Hong Kong early 2016. And I can't remember precisely how we met up, but I think you organised the unconscious bias event, right, for arbitral women. Was that it, or was it something else?
There was a dinner that was organised. There was just a couple of people.
Oh, that's right. That was before. Yep.
Yes, right around the time when we moved there.
Yeah, so we've gone a few places before we'd barely met, yeah.
On that note, about your career journey. So although you speak perfect German, you're actually originally from Australia, and you got your LLB from Australia. How did your career take you through to Europe and now Asia and Hong Kong?
It was basically my desire to try different things. So I wanted to come to Germany when I was younger, and had the opportunity to join a host family when I was 15 near a German city called Düsseldorf, and I loved the country, loved the language, loved the cultural differences to Australia, and studied German at university. And basically, as a 22-year-old Australian from Brisbane who'd never lived anywhere else, I really wanted to get out and applied for a master's in Cologne through a contact I met at the Vismut, a professor who was the coach of the Cologne team. And he accepted me, and then I ended up in Cologne, stayed in Germany for almost 15 years, including a stint in Switzerland, which we'll get to a bit later, and felt that I wanted to work in a fully English-speaking jurisdiction again. Not that Hong Kong is just that, but of course legal proceedings are done in English, and I also wanted to be closer to my family. Remembered Hong Kong fondly from having visited there, including for the hearing where I met your grandfather, and applied for a job through a recruiter and ended up in Hong Kong in April 2016. How about yourself? You've also had a similarly international career path, so how did yours come about?
Well, I was born in Paris, and I moved to Bangkok when I was 6. but I spent my formative years in the States, in San Francisco, high school, college, law school, and I started my career at MoFo San Francisco. But at the time, there was such little arbitration work to do that I realized that the only way I could do international arbitration work full-time was to be somewhere I wasn't qualified to practice. So that's how I left. And then it took me to Bangkok, Paris, where we met, back to Bangkok, and then Hong Kong, and now finally Singapore.
Great. So you mentioned Paris quite a few times there, and obviously you've got strong connections to Paris, including recently when I also came and saw you, where you were doing your PhD in Paris during COVID. So how did you find the transition from being in a firm for so many years, then you're all of a sudden on your own writing a PhD when the whole world was in lockdown? So it must have been a bit of a shock.
It was such a transition, going from practicing to academia. And what I was used to in the past was structures and deadlines. Even when you're in school normally, you would have midterms, final exams. When you're in private practice, you have filing deadlines, research deadlines. But when you're working on a PhD, you really have to build a new set of skill to me, which was self-discipline, self-motivation, getting up in the morning and writing and reading when there was no fixed deadline. And that was a difficulty. And also, it was very isolating in a way. You're not working with your classmates. You don't have groups. PhDs in France, you're pretty much on your own. There aren't any kind of groups that you could join and commiserate. But at that time, I was also able to teach and sit as independent arbitrator. And I think the teaching part was really rewarding because I still keep in touch with some of my students, one whom is a trainee with us now today, years later.
Right. Yeah.
And you did your PhD as well.
Yeah, I did. And I have to say, my recent career change, which we'll get to in a moment, is actually... when I was looking through the notes for this, it reminded me of why I feel a deja vu at the moment. And I think I feel now in a similar position to when I did my PhD. Because what I did, I was working at the chair of a professor, and it was all very flexible. So I basically front-loaded my commitment, my work commitment, and then essentially had 18 months off at the end to get the PhD done. So it was sitting at home, not in a pandemic, but on your own. You're responsible for getting up in the morning, working out goals for the day or at least for the week. And it was a really interesting time. And I'm very happy with my own company, but that was a bit too much of that. So I fully appreciate how it must have been for you, sort of double loading that kind of isolation when you're in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, similar experiences, but different times.
So do you think that a PhD basically, in a way, teaches us complementary skills that could bring to our practice?
I think it does. For me, I think at our level, self-discipline is part of the job. One thing that I do see done differently at partner level in law firms is time management. And I'd like to think I have good time management, but I look around me. I think in our generation it's different, and people generally are better at time management than perhaps they were in other generations, and we do a lot more ourselves compared to sort of the older generation law firm partner who can't write an email without a secretary's assistance, that kind of thing. And I'm exaggerating, but I do still see that happening. I think getting into detail and precision, particularly as an arbitration lawyer writing long briefs, is also a skill that you hone doing a PhD, something like that. So I do think you get complementary. I think working in a team is a huge part of being in a law firm, and that's something that a PhD doesn't really teach you. But there are a lot of skills that will benefit a career in a law firm after or in between, whenever you do, depending on when you do your PhD. I do think it helps a lot.
For me, it was a little bit different in the sense that not only the self-discipline, but because I knew I wanted to return to private practice. And actually, a PhD for me was a personal goal. That's when I discovered the notion of what people now call personal branding. But at the time, I had to really think about how do I stay relevant still in the international arbitration field, especially in Asia, while I was in Europe, sitting by myself at home, writing the PhD. So I was involved in Arbitral Women, organizing online events in Asia, trying to find ways to maintain a presence and contacts in Asia throughout, because I knew I wanted to come back here.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge, but also I think with the pandemic, it helped getting connected with people much more easily.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you'd been doing that in a non-pandemic time with a lot of physical events, I think the isolation would have been more pronounced because we couldn't travel. Everyone was in the same position. They were sitting at home doing different things. So perhaps it was lower impact given the time that you were writing it. So that might have been a good thing.
So Mariel, you built much of your career in Hong Kong. What were your cultural and professional shifts coming from Europe and Asia?
I've been in Asia now for 10 years, so it feels like a long time ago. But of course, you come in from a very direct culture. I was in Germany for 15 years. In international law firms, you were told on no uncertain terms. When you did a less than ideal job, you were given criticism in a constructive way, but very directly. Also with the Australian background, which I think is also quite direct, maybe not quite as direct and dry as the Germans. But coming into Asia, of course, I put my foot in it when I first arrived. You are too direct in circumstances where you don't need to be direct. And I think now what I like to think of it is it's a bit of a dance, right? Like if you don't, I think in Thai, in some Asian languages, there's no real word for no. And that for me says a lot about the culture in Asia. And you get better over time at reading cues when it actually is a no, but someone doesn't want to tell you it's a no. And at the beginning, you're like, yes means yes, no means no, and why haven't you done what you said you were going to do? And now it's just like, okay, you listen to someone, you see their reaction, you assess, and you're like, yeah, they've said yes, but it's not going to happen, which is fine. Like, I think it's all part of the culture. I think there's a lot of advantages. It's very polite. It's very non-confrontational. It's about saving face, not making the other person look bad or exposed or disrespected. So I like the culture here. I think in sort of contentious law firm practice, it's difficult sometimes if you need a straight answer and you feel you're not getting one. But on balance, I think the culture is definitely more in favour of everyone behaving decently and being polite and, avoiding things that you don't want to talk about, which outside the work context is probably not a bad thing.
The saving face definitely was one of my big lessons of when I moved back to work in Asia. Coming from quite a litigious background, practicing in a litigation firm in the States, and although doing a little bit of arbitration, it was still very American-centric. So I was in Bangkok, and I remember that we received a notice of arbitration from an opposing counsel based on the UNCITRAL model law and not the UNCITRAL arbitration rules, and that was the clause. So I immediately got to writing a letter chastising the opposing counsel for not knowing the difference. And I remembered the Thai partner said to me, Vanina, you can't write this. He's older than you. And immediately he said, you cannot let him know that he's not intelligent. And so I thought, okay, I will tone it down. I won't point it out then. And what was funny is that the very same partner, one day we had a hearing, and there was an alumni from his law school who was younger than him but was being disrespectful. So he said to me, Vanina, do your American thing. And he was kind of telling me, so I immediately raised my hand and said, objection, and not being sure what I was objecting to, but immediately. So every once in a while, he'll tell me to be direct, but otherwise I have to navigate that nuance of ensuring a saving face, a hierarchy, even when dealing with opposing counsel.
Yeah. I think it's a really important skill in IA because you've got to be culturally nimble if you want to have a truly international practice. And I think in the HKIAC role, you see quite a bit of people coming in because it's a common law jurisdiction, thinking that they can do Hong Kong because they know their way around another common law jurisdiction without really paying enough attention to all the cultural cues that are there because you're in China. Yes, a common law jurisdiction within China, but there's different ways of doing things, respecting your counterparty, being effusive in an email that might sound complimentary with a Western lens, but is actually someone's expressing frustration and trying to cover that up by saying, we really value our wonderful business relationship, while at the same time, people aren't paying each other and that kind of thing. So I do think it's a really important skill. Of course, there are nuances in every part of the world, but at least from where you and I sit, you've got a nice Western lens on things if you need to have it. You've also got the cultural lens of being in Asia. And I personally find, had I not spent 10 years in Hong Kong, my international arbitration experience would have been worse off for it, because you really do only see everything through the one lens if you're only working in a Western sort of influenced environment.
And do you think there is a difference between Australia and Europe in how things are being done?
I think there are nuances. And I think everything's changing, right? The world's getting smaller with the internet. Everyone's got more access to information, which is a good and a bad thing, especially right now, I think. But I find these days the Australians are also very awake to the reality that if you want to do international arbitration as an Australian lawyer, you need to get outside Australia quite regularly. And I think, they bring a lot of skill. There's a huge construction infrastructure industry there, especially here this week at Singapore Convention Week. A lot of Australians are here. I think Europeans, especially where I was in Germany, they've always been very mindful of the fact that they're in the middle of Europe. There's absolutely nothing remarkable about going to France for a hearing or going down to Switzerland or, that kind of thing. I think Australia's gotten more mobile over the years that I've been practicing, but I don't find culturally there's huge differences. There's small sort of mindset nuances, but that's about it.
I would say the States and France for me was definitely different.
Yeah.
Especially with the way you address people. And this just came up in a conversation yesterday about, how in French language there's different kinds of formality, whether you vous voyez or tutoyer. Yeah. But in English, you just use the term vous. And in the French culture, there's much more layers of formalities, and that still exists today.
Yeah, actually in German, in that aspect, I think it's relaxed a bit, and even in Germany, I spent the longest time in a US firm where it was always from the get-go the informal form of address, which as a foreigner sort of saves you a lot of grief because you're not always sitting there trying to work out how to conjugate your verb to make sure it's the polite form and you don't offend anyone. But yeah, there is that layer, but I think, and I still see it in Germany, and it fascinates me because no matter how long I spend there, I can't access that because in English, of course, we show respect and distance and deferential treatment in a different way. So, yeah, that's the one bit that I haven't really integrated into the Sie and the Du in German. So, yeah. But of course, in contrast, US and France, there's a marked difference.
So in a way, internationality is not just about moving between countries, but really adjusting to cultural expectations in professional settings and not just your daily life. Exactly,
yeah. I think it pervades everything. And of course, sometimes you see people who are new to a jurisdiction and might slightly be off-centre with respect to cultural expectations, but I think it's a very sort of understanding area that we're in because you're new. You and I, having moved around so much, we've been new in a lot of places at least once. And once you spend a bit more time there, you can navigate it a bit easier, I think. But yeah, it's definitely about the ability to adapt and react to where you are.
Do you think it also makes you better counsel and better arbitrator to understand? Because sometimes, from my experience, I notice that relationships break down in business due to cultural misunderstandings quite a bit.
I think it's important in both roles. As counsel, of course, it depends on who your client is, who the counterparty is, all those sort of parts of the equation. I think as arbitrator it's critical, and I know at the FCIArb when I was there, one of the things we looked at more throughout my time was not just the common law, civil law, the sort of black letter rule things that you tick off when you're looking for an arbitrator, but also, okay, has this person spent enough time in Asia to be able to appreciate the nuances that, for example, a Chinese party will bring to this dispute, or are they going to decide this the way they would if they were sitting in the UK in front of sort of Western parties? And I think it's a very, very important aspect. Of course, you pick your party arbitrator, that's your prerogative. But in terms of the institutional role in appointing arbitrators, I found it critically important that we got someone who was nimble in the cultures that were likely to be at play in the arbitration, because I genuinely felt, and I still feel strongly about this, that if you're not doing that, you're not doing your job as an institution to appoint people who can effectively, efficiently resolve the dispute.
So you've made big transitions from counsel to partner to Secretary General and to now independent arbitrator. What guided you through those moves, and which one was the hardest?
That's such a good question. What guided me through those moves? When you're in a law firm, at least for me, and it's not the goal for everyone, and I fully understand that. For me, I wanted to become a partner. I felt the more senior I got at the associate level, you are essentially drafting everything at some point. You do hold responsibility for your draft because the partner will hold you responsible, but you didn't really have the autonomy and the control. So that was one of the points that made me want to become partner, and I was very fortunate in the firm I was at in Hong Kong at CMS to make it, and I was very, very happy there. But when the opportunity for the HKIAC came along, I knew it was going to be a very different role. I was not 100% certain that it was going to be the right role. And you've got to remember, this was COVID. The world was in a weird place. Hong Kong was in a weird place at that point. But I knew equally that if I didn't take the opportunity, I would have thought about what if. So I did it. So that comes to the second part of your question, what was the hardest? That was definitely the hardest role I've ever done. You're very exposed. Everyone knows who you are. Everyone is watching you, and particularly at that point, because we were coming out of the pandemic, there were criticisms about Hong Kong not coming out as quickly as other jurisdictions, and of course the comparisons in the region were obvious. And at the beginning I was just petrified about misstepping and saying the wrong thing, because someone was listening, someone was writing it down, and of course it would get back to me. I became less paranoid as I did the job for longer, also because the pandemic eased off and everything kind of went back to normal. But I don't regret a second of it. It was incredibly rewarding. I learned so much about how an organisation that's different to a law firm operates, reporting to a board, reporting to counsel, being in a role where you're almost an ambassador for your jurisdiction in so many ways. You just meet people because they want to meet the person who's leading the institution, and it becomes depersonalised, which was fine. But from the law firm, it was a huge jump, because in a law firm, they come to you because of your expertise. They want you personally on the case because of what you've done in the past and what you show on your CV. Whereas in that role, it was very much you're a representative. You have a line that you present to the parties. You have to a visitor. You have a persona, and it was a very, very different role. But I really found it incredibly interesting for that reason. So, yeah. You've often spoken about challenges for women in arbitration. What has your experience been, and is there a one-size-fits-all for the challenges, or do they differ across different legal cultures?
I think they do differ across legal cultures. There will be, and this is obviously a very difficult question. And I think throughout the years, we've talked a lot about this. And we did have the event yesterday addressing the change in percentage over the last 10 years of women appointed as arbitrators. But I think probably the idea that there is a lack of gender parity is sometimes acknowledged in some jurisdiction as a real problem that should be addressed. But in some jurisdictions or in some firm cultures, it's still not really visible and cause of something that needs to be consciously dealt with. And I would say, for example, it would be more toward unconscious bias. And these are things that people don't really think about because nobody thinks that they're biased. And in general, we don't think we're biased. But when we see a snake, we're going to think it's venomous. And even though in reality, only few species of snakes are venomous. But that's actually a good kind of unconscious bias because it's better to be safe than to be bitten by a snake. So that's my pro-unconscious bias example. But interestingly, there was a test that was done about bias and discrimination. And everybody was answering correctly that are Asians better at math? And people would say no. And they were like, well, either people have eliminated all of their biases and discrimination doesn't exist anymore. But statistics were still showing that if the name was a female versus a male candidate who had the exact same qualifications, the number of male candidates would be called versus a female. Or in symphonies, the auditions, women would rarely be chosen, but when it was a blind symphony audition, much more percentage of women were chosen. So in terms of unconscious, I would notice examples, and this is from earlier on in my career, the idea of being surprised when a woman does something well, such as getting into the PhD program and having a surprise reaction. Or in my earlier career, in my early days, being told, by external counsel, we have this client and you're a woman and you're young, so you cannot sit in front of the client and you cannot say anything. Eventually, the client dismissed the external counsel and decided to ask for my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, this is a whole systematic movement, isn't it, at the end of the day? And you've got so many good examples, and I do think things have changed a lot. And I look around our generation at the men in our generation, and it has changed a lot. But of course, that's not the entire legal world that we operate in. You've got clients with different perceptions. You've got different cultural perceptions. I've got a client at the moment when we were looking for arbitrators, and very woke male legal counsel, but he did say to me, if we pick a female arbitrator, do you think the Chinese party will accept them? And I thought it was a very odd comment to make, and he made it with the best intentions, but I hadn't even thought about that aspect. And it was just a sort of wake-up call for me that people do still think differently, and that in my little world that I've carved out for myself, that's fine, but it's not going to take me very far if I get out into the real world and you're blind to what other people are thinking. So things like the comments that you hear, and sometimes it can be hurtful and confronting, but I always find, okay, we've still got somewhere to go and we've still got work to do. And some people, you probably won't change their mind, but I'm sure in a lot of cases, as you said before, it's unconscious. And if you can constructively work towards understanding where that's coming from, you can probably also help alleviate the problem. So, yeah, there's a lot to still be done in all the different facets that come together, particularly in somewhere like an international arbitration.
So for younger practitioners aspiring to an international arbitration career, especially those without an obvious international profile, what advice would you give?
You need to get one. An international profile, I mean. It's difficult to give general advice because people may not be mobile for a variety of reasons, but if you've got the opportunity at the start of your career to go somewhere, do something different, get yourself out of your comfort zone, I would absolutely recommend it. I remember when I went to Germany, my German wasn't very good. As part of the master's program there, they basically throw you into the first semester law degree for like 3 semesters, and you're surrounded by a bunch of very entitled, self-righteous young German students who are probably about 10 years younger than you. Not quite, because they're a bit older in Germany. But it was a baptism of fire, and then having to write like assignments in German and just, you know your language is not up to scratch. But at the end of the day, and fast forward 20 years, a bit more, if I hadn't done that experience, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I do think there's a lot to be said just going out and doing it. Don't overthink it. Get somewhere. I mean, as you said before about your wanting to do international arbitration, if you know that's what you want to do, of course, if you're junior, you might have to be a bit more flexible because you will primarily have to do the work that you're given within the environment that you're working. But if you've got freedom to go overseas and do further study or an internship or go to an institution, just go for it. I think these days there's so much information out there. You go on LinkedIn, people like Mandy Lee who put up their internship opportunities, put up who's hiring, just go. I mean, you've got to try it out. And one thing that I think you and I get both a lot of is someone who just wants a 10-minute Zoom coffee or a physical coffee in weeks like this, just to chat about options and how you go about something and what we think they should do. And of course they can take our advice with a grain of salt, but if they're reaching out and getting a variety of opinions, hopefully something there will resonate with them and help them sort of decide the next step of their journey. So just do it.
And the Mandy Lee page Mariel was referring to is Career in Arbitration. So that's the link page on LinkedIn that I would encourage everybody to follow. And I agree that while being mobile is not an option for everybody, but if you can, definitely seize that opportunity. And even some institutions now have virtual internships, such as the SIAC, and seek out mentors. But find mentors with something in common. Don't just send mass emails to everybody and expect a response. Definitely try to find maybe common university background or common interest in a field, such as if you're into ISDS or some construction law, for example.
Yeah, fully agree. I think, your point about mentorship is very well made. I think because mentorship doesn't happen. It doesn't just happen, right? You don't get people, that person's my mentor. I mean, that's a process, right? You've got to find someone you can get on with, someone you respect, someone who is almost not on your wavelength. Wavelength's not but you need someone where there's a certain degree of vibe between the two of you. Otherwise, you can try all you like, but that mentorship relationship might just not work. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And you're not going to find out who's a good mentor unless you actually get your name out there, approach a few people, see if it goes anywhere, and then you can take it to the next level.
So what is one takeaway? What does it mean to you, internationality?
What does it mean to me? I think, being here, we both went to the same event last night, and you look around and so many people there are not working in a jurisdiction that they trained in or grew up in or any combination of those kind of factors. And I do think these days, particularly with the world being as it is, both politically very interesting but also the ability to move around, I think, has become easier and easier. I do think internationality is a core part of being a good international arbitration practitioner, even if you're just doing court work in support of arbitration, which is a huge industry in many jurisdictions. You still need to understand how a different legal system thinks, how they're going to perceive your arguments in order to be a better advocate. So I really do think it's front and centre to the career that we're doing right now. How about you?
I would say the first is taking risk to get out of your comfort zone. I mean, both you and I have had to study and work in our non-native language, and that was extremely difficult and challenging times. Being adaptable to and open-minded to different cultures, different legal systems, different ways of communications. And resilience. Sometimes we don't achieve what we want immediately. It takes grit, it takes tenacity, it takes hard work, but it's worth it if it's truly what you want.
I agree. And I think we as women do tend to focus more on things we think we didn't do as well as we could have than on the things that we do well. So to the extent that you learn from those experiences and, go back inside yourself and come back next time to do it better, I think it's a very important quality to have.
And keep your contacts, because you never know from a corridor when you're going to run into somebody, and keep running into them around the world again.
Yeah, Vanina, amen to that. Fully agree.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Maxwell Chambers, and especially to Karen Tann, who's been doing fantastic work to promote women, especially we discuss this issue.
Yeah.
And on the directory for female arbitrators of all the institutions that empanel female arbitrators in the region. I think that's a tremendous initiative. And also this Unplugged podcast to give a voice to female practitioners and arbitrators in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well, also to Karen and to Maxwell Chambers.